Welcome back to another episode of Thought Giant Things. जैसा कि आपको पता है कि अफगानिस्तान में there's a lot of things happening, and इसी के साथ हमने multiple podcasts भी किए थे. आज we have a very special guest with us for pertaining to the Afghanistan situation. We have the Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on Information, Raoof Hasan Saab, who's also the Chief Executive Officer of Regional Peace Institute, which is a think tank that does जो वो करते हैं वो I'd like to ask him as well. Raoof Saab, thank you so much for being part of the show.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me here.
Raoof Saab, I'll start the conversation with asking a little bit about what Regional Peace Institute is.
Well, we conduct bilateral dialogues at Track 2 and Track 1.5, and Afghanistan is the principal country that we've been dealing with for the last 7-8 years now. Right. It's a place very close to my heart, and particularly grateful that you've invited me here to talk about this country.
Zabardast. I'm gonna sort of jump right into it. Afghanistan में नई government announced हुई है, interim government announced हुई है. What's your take on that? जो अभी the names that have been announced, the government that has been announced.
It may not be strictly in accordance with the expectations, which had been generated because of the statements coming out of the Taliban leadership. But it comprises the old guard, and they all, very devoted members of the Taliban, and they were part of the government they had in the 90s, and they have been, they were part of this war that they waged for 20 years. But this is, number one, an interim government, and number two, it is an incomplete cabinet. Right. They have said that more ministers are likely to be inducted. As you can see, there's no woman in the cabinet, so it is expected, that in the second consignment that comes, there will be some women, and also. I think members of the other stakeholders in Afghanistan to turn this into what is generally referred to now as an inclusive government. So we expect that to happen soon.
Right, makes sense. अगर मैं इसी को थोड़ा सा expand करूँ, global community इस वक्त जो है ज़ाहिर है, some of them are looking at it very clearly, very closely. Some of them are, saying कि, we might just sanction them. China के रोल में और US के रोल में अगर आप मुझे थोड़ा बता सकें कि how are they seeing the current government in Kabul?
Well, I think there is enormous difference between the manner in which the two countries have responded to the developments in Afghanistan. The Americans, as we were discussing before the recording commenced, they were the ones basically who legitimized Taliban, by signing the deal, back in 2020, February 29th, if I remember it correctly. But now they want them to earn, as they call it, their legitimacy. While on the one hand, it had already legitimized the Taliban back in 2020. Now they want them to earn it all over again. Right. So this enormous contradiction, in the two stances. While on the other hand, the Chinese have always been engaged with the Taliban, and in the last number of years, they are still engaged with the Taliban. And I reckon that I think they'll be playing a very positive role, very productive role with regard to the resurgence of Afghanistan as a viable, credible, and sustainable country.
Right. I believe they have given some sort of financial aid as well recently.
They have given a tranche of, I think, $300 million. I think the first country to do so, and particularly under the present circumstances, when I think there is an economic virtual collapse, because the Western countries have stopped the flow of money to Afghanistan, including what legally belongs to the state of Afghanistan. So we can possibly discuss that in greater detail as we progress.
Right. Economic sustainability, I think that's very important, right? And उसका start में इससे करूँगा कि we saw that the $10 billion जो अफगानिस्तान का essentially foreign exchange reserve था, that's sitting in New York and that's been blocked. Do you think, I feel like that doesn't make a lot of sense considering, again, मैं peace deal में जाऊँगा पहले. दो चीज़ों की वजह से it doesn't make sense to me. First of all, the peace deal did not mention, as per what's available in the public, कि government कैसी होगी या उसके हिसाब से हम financial वो किस तरह से देखेंगे. और दूसरा ये कि the idea that you mentioned कि you earn your legitimacy, it's like asking the bird to fly while cutting the wings off, right? So how do they see the current government doing anything when they don't even have the money to do so?
Well, technically, this money that you're talking about belongs to the state of Afghanistan, and I don't think any country has a right to hold that money back, irrespective of which government is there to take things forward. The Western countries, in a long time now, they have been waging this war of change of government. Middle East is in a huge crisis space. You look at Syria, look at Iraq, look at Libya, and Afghanistan is one country, in that chain of activities that the Americans and the Western powers, they initiated, and I think it has destroyed part of the world. This has to come to an end. Now that the Taliban are there, like going back to 2020, it is the Americans who requested Pakistan to broker talks with the Taliban. Pakistan did so, and they sat across, they discussed things over a number of months, and then they actually signed a deal.
Right. Was Pakistan present during those?
No, Pakistan was not. Pakistan just facilitated. Then it was left to the Americans and the Taliban to sort things out, and they did. By signing on the dotted line, there were just two clauses to that. In exchange for the Taliban commitment not to allow the use of Afghan soil for any terrorist activity, the Americans gave a timeline for withdrawal of troops. That means they extended recognition to the Taliban, not just as an entity, but also as the potential rulers of Afghanistan. Otherwise, how do you seek this kind of commitment from a nobody?
Right.
So, on the one hand, they did that. And now, on the other hand, they expect to know that the Taliban will earn their legitimacy all over again. So how do the Americans expect the Taliban to earn that legitimacy?
And if the legitimacy wasn't earned, why were peace talks done in the first place?
Absolutely. So their legitimacy in their context is that the Afghanistan society is transformed along the lines of the Western societies.
Right.
The Americans did it for 20 years. Go through the Seagar papers, basically. You must have gone through that. I mean, they have dreams and dreams of how this entire thing was mismanaged. When they wanted to turn Afghanistan into a so-called Western democracy.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to have the ground conditions, which are conducive to doing what you plan to do in that country.
Right.
So 20 years of utter, total, shameful failure in Afghanistan, and they still expect that Afghanistan is going to be transformed along those lines. That's not happening. So if that is their concept of inclusivity, then obviously
it's made to
I don't. It's much too much to expect of Afghanistan and the leadership that is there to rule Afghanistan at this juncture.
Right. Beyond the US, I mean, regional, there are a lot of regional players as well who have a lot of stake in terms of, Afghanistan being stable and peaceful. One country particularly, Qatar has played an important role, not as a broker of peace or in terms of as the place where it was being done. But also I was reading that the Qatar government helped sort of repair the Kabul airport. What do you think is Qatar's role in all of this? And why are they doing all of this?
Qatar's role has been one of the principal roles. They are the ones who offered Taliban to open a political office in Doha, and that office has played a major role in negotiating deals with various countries, and carrying on the political activity that the Taliban did. That is why we are where we are today. So yesterday, Qatar's Deputy Prime Minister, who also holds the Foreign Minister portfolio, he was here. And interestingly, Pakistan and Qatar have jointly requested of America to release those funds for Afghanistan to avert the prospect of an humanitarian crisis. This is what we generally refer to as an humanitarian crisis. The Western press was, constantly labeling, the chaos at Kabul airport as a humanitarian crisis. That's no humanitarian crisis. They are economic migrants. Basically, they would, you give that offer to any other country, and you would have the people throng the airports, in their bid to go to the country where they feel they have better prospects.
Right.
So this is a humanitarian crisis when people don't have food to eat, when they don't have money to spend, when the state does not have money to spend, the government does not have money to spend. So I think it's a huge responsibility that rests on the shoulders of the Western countries, the so-called democratic countries, to ensure that funds begin to flow into Afghanistan so that they can run the government and they can, cater to the basic needs of the people.
And very important to put out there, this is not even humanitarian aid. This is the money of the Afghan people that has been blocked by another country altogether.
That is what I said. It is legally theirs. It is legally there. It can't be held back.
Right. In terms of, again, you talked about the economy, you talked about, there being a humanitarian crisis in the absence of, let's say, again, if the Americans don't give the $10 billion back, where do you see the economy going? Because right now, I mean, the infrastructure is collapsed. There is no system. There's just only been a government, 3 days, 4 days ago. So how do you see the economy faring in the coming few months?
I've written repeatedly in the last 3 weeks, on the subject, and I think it's very important. It's critical to the future of Afghanistan. I feel that there's a huge responsibility that rests on Afghanistan's neighbors as at stage one, and Afghanistan and this region at stage two. I think in the absence of the West playing a role, which which unfortunately appears to be the case, at least till this moment in time as we sit and talk, I think Afghanistan's neighbors and then the regional countries, neighbors, there are 5.
Right.
Afghanistan is the 6th one, and they have met twice. Right. Even 2 days ago they met, and they have now decided to invite Afghanistan. On Pakistan's suggestion, they are going to invite Afghanistan to participate in the next meeting of the
foreign ministers
at the foreign ministers level, of Afghanistan and its neighbors. So I think they will possibly have to shoulder the brunt of responsibility, and I think they must. It's important because basically all this is about peace, creating peace in Afghanistan, ensuring that the terrorist stations are eliminated from there, and there is no disturbance along the borders of Afghanistan with other countries. So, to ensure that, you have to banish impoverishment, and for that you need money. You can't. If you have impoverishment, there's bound to be terror. To be terror, and this has been sort of reiterated through so many researches, which have been conducted in the last many years, So that's number one. So these countries possibly will bear the primary responsibility, including Pakistan. But I think these countries are going to be led by China, and we already said, that they have announced a tranche of about $300 million for Afghanistan, as money going there, so that they can, run the day-to-day business. Then, of course, there will be Russia. I think they will possibly chip in a little. I expect that at some stage Turkey will also be inducted into this group, so they will chip in a little. I think they possibly can do that. But the principal responsibility is this. But then I think at a different level, Muzammil, I think we should wage a political battle at the international fora like United Nations and all other, like SCO, we were talking about that, urging the Western world, that now is the time to stand with Afghanistan, to encourage it, to give them space so that they're able to take Afghanistan into a future that they envision is appropriate for it. They have tried for 20 years. They tried to transform Afghanistan into a society that they could not.
Right.
They were utterly clueless. Once again, I would refer to the cigar papers. All you need to do is to access those papers. So now they have a government which is of the people.
Right.
So they must at least facilitate them.
Right.
Even if they cannot help them. By sending in aid and all that, they should at least return to them what is legally theirs, morally theirs. They should not hold it back. So I think a great responsibility rests on, number one, Afghanistan's neighbors, number two, regional countries, and of course the international community, to stand with Afghanistan to help them to, wade into the future.
Right. I think one of the questions that comes in my mind ever so often is, it's a chicken and egg. So do you have a sort of a social revolution first or an economic revolution first, right? Like, how do you, if you have mouths to feed, do you ask them to be different people in terms of their culture and their society, and do you ask them to be more empowered? And so if I look at, the current Afghan government, and if I go, a few decades back and I look at what some of the governments in the Middle East, before the oil money, they were very different. And then once the economic activity started happening and people got the money, and so we saw incredible amounts of evolution in terms of their social structure as well, very contextual to their own, obviously, setup. But still, they were, in terms of how the world looks at, the modern world, we saw those countries to be able to enter that. Again, with Afghanistan, when the West constantly demands them to change their social structure or the way that they sort of deal with, women and the way that they deal with how the society is functioning. Do you think it's possible, and again, based on the last 20 years that we've seen, to not have any economic activity and yet expect or demand that socially they'll be able to change?
Well, change evolves. It is never imposed.
Right.
You see, if you go through the pages of history, change has evolved, always evolved. In the Western democracies today, they did not become this overnight. There were no dictators, who sort of went around with a rod or a whip or something and saying, all right, this is not the way you're going to live your life. This is the way you're going to live the life. And they obediently transformed to what was being dictated about it, Afghanistan is a very backward state. It's a very tribalized society. Right. And they live by what they call Pashtun Wali. Pashtun Wali is a code of honor for them, basically.
Right.
And you see, anybody who violates the Pashtun Wali, becomes an outcast in that society. Change, yes, I am totally committed to the fact that change must occur in Afghanistan, but you can't force it to occur, force it to happen. First and foremost is the means to survive and to progress economically. That means money must come in. That means money must be earned in Afghanistan. That means provisions must be created by the government of Afghanistan for people to earn money, to become more comfortable with their lives and all that. Then at the same time, they must have money to to open new schools, health centers and all that. These are basic needs of the Afghan people at this time. In the last 20 years, again, I keep referring to SIGA papers. Just imagine, I mean, out of the 2 trillions, that were sent by the Americans, and so many other countries also sent money. Virtually nothing was invested in the welfare of the people. Like, we must give this government a chance. And change, yes, it must occur, but let them first make their society and their state sustainable. That's important. And, social change and, other changes, will occur, as a consequence of that, not as a precursor to that. You can't just force it, that it will happen. And so economic survival will also come. No, economic survival will not come. That's just we earned. And that is where the international community and regional community, must play a role. So, I think it is in that order that we must try to proceed further. And I think change will definitely happen. The last 20 years have definitely made a difference. And that is, people have become sensitive to freedoms now. And you can't, if people become sensitive to freedoms, you can't just take them back. It's very difficult, A step which is taken, it's very difficult to retract that step. So I think the Afghan society today is much more enlightened, much more forward-oriented, much more sensitive to freedoms, much more aware of freedoms. So I think gradually, with the passage of time, they will earn those freedoms, or they will help those freedoms evolve in the Afghan society within the ambit of their domain, within the ambit of their cultural constraints and their religious constraints and all that. It cannot become like the Western society. It's a different society. I can't project about the next 100 years or 200 years, and I'm sure nobody can. But for the foreseeable future, I expect it to remain a tribalized society, but a tribalized society which is on the way to improving with the passage of time.
Makes sense. It's incremental in its evolution.
Absolutely. Incremental evolution.
One of the things that we've heard the government of Pakistan constantly say is, we need an Afghan-led solution. And, looking at the past 40 years with the Soviet intervention and then with the US invasion, how important do you think at this point in time is the fact that the Afghan solution needs to be led by the Afghans themselves? Because it seems like nobody else really truly understands what's going on there.
They are leading it. I don't think there's any interference at all from any other country at this moment. And I think they must lead it, because unless it is led by Afghans, it will not be acceptable to the Afghans. Graveyard of empires, it's a term, which is not coined without a reason for it. Basically, the British tried it, the Soviets tried it, the Americans have tried it. They've gone back, and they've gone back pretty embarrassed. So I think any country which has the wisdom will not even think of interfering in the Afghanistan affairs. But it does not mean that you cannot extend help and support and encouragement. And this is what I've always been projecting, in my articles and pieces that I've written over the last many weeks. I think we have to stand with Afghanistan, whatever they are. They may not be exactly like us. They may definitely not be like the West. But the fact is, that we have to help them and encourage them to move on and change as they move on. This is important. So it is an Afghan-led and Afghan-owned. I think Taliban are very much an indigenized community, and they have come into power today. This war has bred a lot of misery for the Afghan people. I think, as I said, they waged through fire for 40 years.
Yep.
It's a moral responsibility of the world to ensure that it does not happen again. And that will happen only when the world stands with Afghanistan and helps it move forward. That's it. And this, unfortunately, is what the West is not doing.
Right.
That's very unfortunate part.
If you talk about, let's say, the regional countries helping Afghanistan, let's say, the West softens its stance as well. Maybe there's some money coming into Afghanistan in terms of a more sustainable economy. Knowing the fact that most of that population has essentially grown up during war, what do you think do they have in terms of, internal economy? What does Afghanistan have that they can sort of rely on for generating economic activity, and something that they can potentially generate quickly?
They have enormous mineral wealth, which has remained untapped for a long time. And the fact that they're talking about their inclination to join the BRI/CPEC, I think that will open up new and productive avenues for Afghanistan. If they become part of the CPEC trail, then that will help Pakistan, that will help Afghanistan, that will help the Central Asian countries, which will eventually be linked, in the trail and all that. So that will open up multiple avenues for Afghanistan to progress economically. and making use of the mineral wealth that they have in abundance in Afghanistan. I think, China can help them, even Turkey can help them, even Pakistan can help them, to make use of that wealth, which is lying underground, and they have not been able to tap into that. So I think 2 or 3 different parallel tracks, that they would they can take, make use of the existing track, which is CPEC, then discover their own mineral resources, and make good use of that. And number 3 is think about the ways and means, basically, which can generate jobs for the people. At this moment in time, it's a struggle for surviving, for most of the people in Afghanistan. And I think if the regional countries can get together and formulate a mechanism whereby they can provision the basic needs of the people of Afghanistan, either in terms of money given to the Afghan government, or in terms of immediately initiating certain projects, which are money generating, which are revenue generating. And I think that will be good. So these are 3 parallel tracks which I think Afghanistan should adopt.
So I see you're repeating this idea of regional countries having a stake in Afghanistan's peace, and I think that's very important. And a fascinating concept for me, because अगर पाकिस्तान की बात की जाए तो constantly, particularly हमारे कुछ certain neighbors हैं और कुछ Western media है जो क्या के बारे में कहते हैं कि Pakistan doesn't want peace, Pakistan is a spoiler. What do you think is Pakistan's role, and what does Pakistan and the region, particularly Central Asian states, you mentioned Russia to be involved, you mentioned China to be involved, what is their stake in a peaceful and potentially stable Afghanistan?
See, the common stake is peace. That means there is no terror in this part of the world. That is Pakistan's stake. Through years, in fact decades, Pakistan has been destabilized from across its western border, particularly in the province of Balochistan, and this was an India/NDS funded and aided and abetted projects, all of them. Basically, so we have suffered destabilization, and I think one of the principal reasons why we have played a constructive role, is that we do not want our borders to be destabilized, across our sort of western neighbor and all that. This is also the ambition of every other regional country, be it China. China is very sensitive to ISK, which has created problems there in Shengan province, So they're very sensitive to any terrorist activity emanating from Afghanistan. So are Central Asian countries, and of course Russia and Iran are also very sensitive to this. So this is a common objective. There should be peace in Afghanistan, because peace in the region is dependent on peace in Afghanistan. This, unfortunately, over time had become the hotbed of terror, starting with Al-Qaeda and even before that. So that is the common bond. So I think there's a legitimate reason for all these countries to play a role, to bring peace to Afghanistan, so that there could be peace in all these countries. And they could also rightfully invest their resources in helping their people, walk out of impoverishment and all that. I mean, this is, again, the other common factor is impoverishment in these countries. Be it Afghanistan, Pakistan, or the Central Asian countries, and even Iran, there is impoverishment. So, which is directly linked to terror, as you know that. You have to eliminate impoverishment, to eliminate terror.
Right, and so
there's a linkage.
So in terms of the economic opportunity here as well, right? Because we do see there's a certain language of regional connectivity that is that has risen in the past few years. And then particularly I was looking at the Pakistani government and how they sort of shifted their focus from geo-security to geo-economics. And that's basically essentially in the context of the region altogether. So a peaceful Afghanistan, what does that mean? Because, I've been seeing the Pakistani government constantly engaging a lot with the Central Asian states, not just in terms of security or Afghanistan, but also in terms of business deals and trade deals and a lot of these things. I remember there was a real sort of memorandum of understanding that was signed with Uzbekistan, I think $5.2 billion a few months ago. And for a lot of people, that's just very, very confusing. Uzbekistan is not a country that we saw in our media a lot. That's and to see a $5.2 billion worth of a deal with them, people definitely do have questions. What do we stand to gain from it?
Peace in Afghanistan means peace in the region. Peace in the region means economic activity in the region. Economic activity in the region means generation of resources to eliminate poverty.
Right. Wealth, wealth creation.
Wealth creation and all that. So elimination of poverty. That will ultimately lead to these countries joining the ranks of the developed world.
Right.
So peace is the fundamental requirement to move along the trail to becoming developed countries, so to say. So this is a common factor between all regional countries, and this is why they're working closely together. Right. They're meeting regularly, and they are constantly thinking of ways and means. Now Pakistan, I think, has proposed that Afghanistan should be invited to attend the next meeting, and I think they will, and I think Afghanistan will also come. So these countries will sit together. When you sit together and we talk about problems, you definitely come up, and you have a positive approach, and you have a common objective. Then I'm sure that they will come up with ways and means and mechanisms, to move forward. And this is the only way. Like I said, Afghanistan has waged through fire, and in a way, other countries of the region too have. And I think we would not want a repetition of that kind of thing happening in the future. So there's a common objective, and I think that brings the countries together, closer together, and that I see happening. And I think it's a very positive thing. This region emerging, as leaders of the world. The West is a declining civilization, as I'm sure you must be aware of that. So we are the ones basically who can replace that decline. China is there. China has played a very major role, and I think other countries of the region are also developing economies, and this is an opportunity which has come their way. And I think by working together with common objectives in mind, they can lead the way to helping Asia emerge as the leaders of the world.
Right,
and I call this actually, in one of my articles, I call this the strategic power corridor.
Interesting.
I refer to it as the strategic power corridor. There is China and there is Russia. There is Pakistan. These are lead sort of countries. So there's the strategic component. Power emanates from there. But basically, the strategic power will emerge out of economic development. That the region goes through. China is virtually there already. But all the rest of the countries, they still have to go a long way. So I think China is helping out. Through CPAC, through BRI, and bilateral agreements, like they've signed one with Iran also. They have helped Pakistan a lot, and they're willing to help other countries, including Afghanistan. So I think it's a stimulating prospect, and I think I look at it that way, and I think the West is wary of it. If you would like to discuss that, they're very wary of it, and this possibly is the reason why they're behaving the way they're behaving, holding things back and not helping Afghanistan because they're afraid of it. But if you look at the geostrategic sort of composition, I think we finally, after 73 years, we are finally playing our cards right. Yeah. We are playing our cards in the region.
Yeah.
Well, way back 1948, 49, we opted to shake hands across 15,000 kilometers of turbulent waters.
Right.
And that, what we have suffered all along because of that relationship. So here we are coming back to the region.
Right.
And signing deals, with the regional countries, working together with the regional countries, and in a bid to attain common objectives.
Right.
So this is where we should have been actually 7 decades ago. But I'm one of since I've been sort of constantly talking and reviewing this, it makes me a very happy person, that my country is finally
on the right track.
On the right track.
Makes a lot of sense. Right. आपने multiple times बताया, regional countries का भी बताया, आपने बताया कि particularly बड़ी exciting बात है आपने कहा कि it's the time of Asia, it's the century of Asia, and potentially Asia could rise. It seems from the indicators now that it's only a matter of time. But अगर मैं रीजनल कंट्रीज़ की बात करूँ, थोड़ी देर पहले ईरान का मेंशन किया था, एंड इट्स व्हेन आई एम लुकिंग एट व्हाट ईरान इज डूइंग विद अफगानिस्तान, आई एम वेरी कंफ्यूज्ड बिकॉज दे हैव बीन ट्राइंग टू सॉर्ट ऑफ एंगेज एज वेल. हिस्टोरिकली एक वो सुन्नी एंड शिया फॉल्ट लाइन थी, बट इन टर्म्स ऑफ एवर सिंस 15th of August वी डिड सी के ईरानियन साइड थोड़ी सी उनसे एंगेजमेंट कर रही थी. बट रिसेंटली मैं पाकिस्तानी कॉन्टेक्स्ट में देख रहा था कि द फॉरेन मिनिस्ट्री पुटिंग आउट ऑड स्टेटमेंट्स, एंड देन देयर आर प्रोटेस्ट्स जो कि इट सीम्स लाइक देयर वेरी वेल curated protests. So what's the angling there? It's very confusing.
You've used the right word, angling. We have consistently pursued a policy of engagement with Iran, and there have been such instances in the past also. This is not the first time that it's happened, that they've come up with statements which are not congruous with the course of development, But we have remained engaged with them. Our ambassador, I think 3 days ago, in Kabul, had a meeting with the Iranian ambassador there. And I think they will tide over this in due course of time. I don't attach too much importance to it. The Iranians are a little concerned about the fact that they are not playing the lead role, which has fallen into Pakistan's kitty. I think we have handled it brilliantly. So they're a little sort of upset. And that sort of finds expression in words, once in a while. So I don't really attach much importance to it because I think we're there, and we would like to take Iran along. I don't think.
And you think Iran will eventually sort of be part of that as well?
Yes, we will, definitely. I think, Iran is already linked with China, and if CPEC moves forward, Iran will move forward, and it will become part of the regional approach and regional initiative, that I'm talking about, and in fact, I'm very eager about. And I understand that Pakistan wants to do the same. This is the broad-based thinking, at the highest level, that we have to proceed further as a region rather than individually. That helps.
Right. And then obviously the other player, being India, right? Even when it came to Belt and Road Initiative, it seems like they are sort of doing what Pakistan was doing a few decades ago, but they're again going 15,000 miles away and partnering with someone who's been pretty confused in terms of how they've been managing the global affairs. Where do you think they're coming from at this point in time? And particularly, I'm going to go deeper into it with a lot of fake news that we've seen. But before that, just to sort of understand, what's India's angle with Afghanistan?
India has been making use of the Afghan soil, over a number of years, particularly in the last 20 years, to destabilize Pakistan. We have talked about it,
Right.
That opportunity is lost.
Actually,
now.
To be very honest, I feel like people just tend to get confused about that a lot. Just to sort of understand in the past 20 years, what has India been doing? Because, I know that I have a huge Indian audience as well. And they keep on mentioning this $3 billion that they invested in Afghanistan. How do you go, or if you could run me through a little bit about what Indian presence in Afghanistan has done, for this space?
India has followed a two-pronged strategy in Afghanistan. One is that they've invested this money to build hospitals, to build schools, to build their parliament building and so much else, basically to earn goodwill. So this has been one part of the strategy. The other part of the strategy has been to make use of the NDS, which is the Afghan intelligence agency, and make use of their consulates spread right across Afghanistan to send terrorists into Pakistan across our western border, bordering Balochistan.
Yep.
So this is the two-pronged strategy. While on the one hand they have been winning goodwill of Afghanistan, particularly under Karzai and Ghani governments. On the other hand, they have been creating problems, for Pakistan.
And using also that as a cover, right? So essentially, like this humanitarian aid and all of that engagement is great cover.
It's only a cover.
Yeah,
absolutely right. So I think we have been protesting to Afghanistan in a long time. We have given them dossiers, containing proofs of what we always suspected was happening from across the border. We had specific reservations about the use of the Afghan soil, for launch of terrorist activity against Pakistan. But unfortunately, Karzai and Ghani governments, they did not pay any attention to it because, unfortunately, again, they had become conduits to this activity, which was basically spearheaded, by the Afghans. Then in their NDS also, there were people like the Imrullah Salis of Afghanistan. There were so many other people basically of having, nurturing similar venom and hatred for Pakistan. This did not have any effect, Now, there has been a transformation. India is virtually out of Afghanistan. Game plan, at least for the time being. Taliban are in charge, and Taliban have committed to Pakistan and to the world that they will not allow the use of their soil, again, for any terrorist activity. India, if you go back to the 90s, when the first war was being fought there, before the Taliban took over, there is the Northern Alliance, the former Northern Alliance. They're trying to resuscitate that Northern Alliance now. Imrullah Salis, understandably, he's fled to Tajik, Ahmad Masood and him. Understandably, both of them have fled to Tajikistan. So they're trying to resuscitate that. But the regional dynamics have completely undergone a shift, Then they had the support of India. They had the support of the former Soviet Union. They had the support of Iran and some other countries also, from Central Asian countries. Now, the regional support is totally missing. Even Iran that we talked about, Iran will not extend support to India to destabilize Afghanistan because it doesn't serve Iran. As I said, the common objective is peace in Afghanistan.
Right.
And if they destabilize Afghanistan by helping India, there will be no peace in Afghanistan. That will definitely impact. It will impact other countries, but it will also impact Iran. So obviously, they are not going to go that far. So India is virtually out of Afghanistan. In the current dynamics, I don't see them playing a role. Right. And definitely not a negative role, that they have been playing in the last 20 years, particularly. I mean, even before that, they were playing that role, but, it was much less as compared to what has happened in the last 2 decades of the so-called westernized democracy in Afghanistan. So this, I think, they will definitely try to provoke a rebellion, in the Panjshir Valley, which is, understandably, they supplied some armaments there also, and they are also extending material support to those few people who are still there. They have not been completely eliminated because they have walked over into Tajikistan. So there were rumors, and there were, I think, some reports also, that about 1,800 people, Tajiks, have vowed support to those people who are part of the resistance movement, the so-called resistance movement. So, for India, it's a paradigm change, from being the most important country in Afghanistan to becoming virtually non-existent. So I think this is, this may provoke some kind of anger and some kind of activity, desperate activity.
And so do you think that desperation essentially can be seen through, because I mean, I've been watching the media past few days. First, I was watching this live transmission from Arnab Goswami, I believe that's his name, and
Arnab Goswami,
and so he had a bunch of these American analysts in, and a lot of the questions that he was answering, even the Americans were like, "Listen, you're wrong about this," and so he was just losing his mind. He was like, the Americans are our allies. Why are they also negating what you were saying? But then we saw like the sort of like the ultimate, the grand finale with the clips from a video game saying these are Pakistani jets on the Panjshir Valley, with a fighter jet, like an American fighter jet in Wales, using clips of that and saying, this is shot down. What's going on? I mean, this is it honestly seems like a fairy tale that we're going to pander any news whatsoever, and seemingly, that news gets picked up as well, because okay, sure, maybe the clips weren't picked up, but a lot of that noise now is being used by the Western media as well, and to ask questions when there is absolutely no fact on the ground that would support it. For example, the idea that Pakistan has been using drones, when in actuality Pakistan does not have the technology that could fly that far and do what they claim we could do, and the world community knows that. So how are we continuously pandering these narratives, or rather, do you think all of this is just for that purpose, narrative building?
This is part of what we generally refer to as the 5th generation war. Fake news is a major component of that. And I think on the 6th of September, I think at a ceremony in GHQ, the Chief of the Army Staff also talked about the need to handle fake news and so many other things, which are directly related to this phenomenon. What is worrisome for me is that even the Western world, which is relatively far more enlightened and far more sort of fact and figure-based, people, they have given into this kind of pandering to unsubstantiated and all that. That's very, very, even BBC, is CNN, and so many other channels that I've watched. I mean, Jalda Hakim, for example, we were talking about it. Christine Fair, for example, we're talking about that, and so many others. That the former Canadian ambassador, Chris Alexander or something. I mean, just go through his tweets and you will understand that it's a level of lunacy that they've already achieved. So I think it's important for Pakistan to take care of this. And I think if you have an organized, we have constituted a special national security committee, to look into that. And I think, in the next months and years, we will be taking special care of this 5th generation war and try to help Pakistan sort of avert any untoward impact of that. But this is, in Pakistan also there is talk of controlling the social media. That basic platform for spreading fake news is social media. So yes, I totally agree with that. I am not in favor of controlling media, but I definitely am one to make sure that the social media operates within given parameters, within legal and moral parameters, which unfortunately is not the case at this moment in time. But if you watch Indian channels, you actually start laughing.
Yeah.
The way those people are conducting themselves, behaving, even their generals, former generals, and their anchors, the one that you talked about, Arnab Goswami. I mean, they've attained a different level of lunacy, basically. So, but I'm happy that we are not indulging in that kind of, diet and all that. We virtually don't even talk about India. So that's great.
Yeah. I'm going to expand the conversation a little bit. particularly in terms of, you mentioned that there is a new power rising, with China taking the lead there. Post-COVID, we also saw that China could potentially be the biggest economy in the world. Previously, it was projected to be, I believe, 29 to 30. Now they've brought it back to 25, 26. And obviously, that does make the US uncomfortable. We've been seeing the trade war. We've been seeing a lot of these sort of decoupling of the economy happening over the past few years. What, in your opinion, are we the first question being very, very simple. Do you think we're going towards a new Cold War? And the second one being, do you think that particular Cold War would be more economic or more sort of like how Russia, Soviet Union and the US were with arms and with bases and expansion on that level?
It's a very important question, Mr. Amil, and I think let's give it some time, basically. I mean, I have no doubt in my mind about the Western approach to imposing this Cold War on Asia.
Right.
Particularly keeping in mind the progress that China has made and continues to make, like you said. Previously, it was projected that they will be the lead economy in the world by 2040. It was advanced to 2029. Now, you're right, it has been advanced to 2024, 2025. So Americans are going to lose their economic ascendancy in the next 2-3 years' time. So they will do everything to destabilize this part of the world, and imposing Cold War. But things are not that simple any longer.
Right.
I mean, although we still refer to America as the sole superpower, but technically it is no longer the sole superpower because China has emerged as a major contender. And in due course of time, which is not going to be very long, I think they will actually become one of the superpowers. So let's look at it that way. Now, their intention, I have no doubts about. They want this to happen in this part of the world so as to stall our progress, led by China. But I think the countries of the region are very sensitive to it. They understand what is happening. So I think this regional approach that I'm talking about, maybe this is the way to move forward, that they work together, they work jointly, in pursuit of common objectives, And the way things are taking shape post-Afghanistan, post-American withdrawal from Afghanistan, I'm very heartened actually, that, the regional countries, are sitting together, trying to devise a joint strategy, joint mechanism, to be able to move forward. I don't think, who is going to help America in this intent to impose a Cold War on this. They only can bank on India. But India will suffer a lot on account of that also. Right. India has to survive in the region. India has a population of 1.2, afflicted with gross impoverishment, poverty. So they have similar issues that Pakistan and other countries.
Post-COVID, they've had it really, really bad.
So they can't afford a Cold War. They can't afford their economic progress to be stalled. And already they have come down a number of notches. It's no longer like it used to be 2 years ago, 3 years ago. They have been consistently coming down in the pace of their economic progress. So India has much to be afraid of from this so-called Cold War. So I feel that yes, India's the inherent wisdom in the Indian leadership. I think, although Modi is an exception to that rule, I do not include him among the wise Indian leaders. That it has consistently had, which have taken the country forward. I feel that in spite of him, they will not fall a victim to this American and Western strategy, to impose a Cold War in this region. And I think Pakistan and other countries have already become very sensitive to this, and they are fighting through. And I think they will succeed. So we won't have an economic Cold War. I think we can't afford it.
Right.
No country in this part of the world can afford it.
And recently on the 15th of June, I believe there was an article regarding the G7's commitment of the Build Back Better world. Do you think they could potentially, so obviously it seems abundantly clear, all the people that I've talked to, most of the policymakers, think tankers in Pakistan, they don't seem too eager to participate in any plan to sort of, counter China or any of that sort. But then suddenly, when you think of, when they come up with a plan, okay, here's an alternative. So there is an alternative, but that alternative is also talking about growth and connectivity, but it's just the American style of it. What happens when, and how serious do you think they were? And what happens when they come and, sort of unveil that and maybe it's 3 times, 4 times as much as what China could offer? Do you think that there is a certain reality to that?
Let me, for example, this is something which is very stimulating for me. Let me give you a bit of my world view of this, Asia is moving forward.
Right.
Let me tell you. But there is one continent which has not really played a role that it should have a long time ago. That is the European continent. It has lived under the shadow of the Americans.
Right.
And I think I have been in touch with many people, many friends there, many think tanks there, and I've been talking to people here in Pakistan also, coming from the European community. Trump gave them a shake-up.
Right.
A huge shake-up. And there is now a thought process, which is taking shape in Europe to begin playing an independent role. I don't think that will happen immediately.
Right.
But that will ultimately happen. It takes 5 years or 10 years. It's very difficult to project. But if that happens, the world is going to become a much more balanced place. It is going to be no longer divided between the Americans and others.
Right.
It will have Europe emerging as a power by itself. And I think it's absolutely vital for two things: peace in the world and economic progress.
So it's not two superpowers, essentially, it's three superpowers. Then,
Yeah, there you are. There you are.
And I feel like that could play a really balancing act between the East and the West.
Balancing act, And I hope, I'm a great proponent of Europe emerging as a major player on its own, not under the shadows of the Americans. And Americans, like they've exploited everybody else, they've exploited my country, your country, Pakistan. They've exploited other countries also. They have also exploited Europe. But I think Trump has given them a wake-up call. So I see a lot of sensitivity to the fact, that we deserve to be playing a role on our own. If that happens, I think we will have a different kind of world altogether. We'll forget about the Cold Wars and we'll forget about everything else. I think we need to move towards a realm of healthy competition.
Right.
And I think, if at all, it will emerge. Look, the European civilization is a much older and much more entrenched civilization. It's a much more sustainable civilization. The Americans are new, basically, and I think they achieved stardom, as I would call it, much too soon, in their lifetime. Right. And unfortunately, they've not been able to make good use of it. They have sort of floundered it away. There's not a war that they won. Somebody asked them, why is it that China is where it is, and why is it that America is where it is now? It's a declining civilization, and China is an emerging civilization. And that person put a counter question, and he said, how many wars have China fought? None. And he said, for how many years America has been without fighting a war? None.
Right.
This is the difference between the two countries. You can't continue progressing if you are constantly engaged in warfare in the world. China has been focused. China has not undertaken, it has not even thought of attacking, let's say,
Taiwan,
what it considers to be its own part. Taiwan. So Hong Kong, it waited. And that reminds me of the Afghans. The Americans and the Western world has not been able to understand the most formidable weapon that the Afghans have. Time/patience.
Yeah.
They wait.
Yeah.
The most formidable weapon they have is patience. They wait generations to get it. 20 years is a long time. 40 years of fire, unremitting fire. And they live on. It's an unbelievable nation. Yeah. So I think this is the new world that I feel is going to take shape. And I at least want it to take shape. I don't know whether it will or not. It's just a projection. But I think Europeans are far more sensitive today to their existence and a role that they can potentially play than they were in the past.
Makes sense. And I'm going to move towards sort of ending this, but I do have one particular direction set of questions. When I look at the Afghan war and particularly what's happened in the last 1 month, it seems like most of the Washington think tankers had absolutely no idea what they were doing in the past 20 years. What went wrong there? And again, did they actually have no intelligence on ground? Because, I mean, the US was the only one with boots on the ground, with assets on the ground, and it seems like they were the most clueless about what's going to happen. It seemed like everybody else had at least some clue of where this might go. And particularly in terms of Pakistan, it seems like we've been telling them a lot of these, news clippings are coming out, statements are coming out of what Musharraf said, of what General Kiani said. What do you think has been going on in the minds of the think tankers sitting in Washington?
Well, what the world sees as having happened over a period of 2 to 4 weeks' time actually did not just happen over 2 to 4 weeks' time. It took much longer. We were taught strategy and tactics, back a number of years ago. And they said, when you want to charge to the front, you don't just charge to the front. You hold back. You clear your back.
Right.
Then you look at your flanks. Then you move forward. And what is it that the Taliban were doing for the last couple of years? They were forging partnerships with their traditional enemies. And where were they concentrating? On all the trade routes. So these 1.5 to 2 years, they were engaged in a different kind of war.
Right. They had evolved themselves.
They were nullifying their opposition. So that is the reason, and they did it. They signed deals with them. They negotiated deals with them. They neutralized them. So when they moved forward, there was no enemy except the enemy sitting in Kabul. And they were razed to ground within no time. There was no war in Afghanistan. There was no humanitarian crisis. There's no prospect of civil war.
Yeah, because
this is because this is the way. Now, I mean, for the Western world, and for the particularly, more specifically for the DC think tankers, they cannot understand. I deal with many of them. They cannot understand these realities. They don't understand. They are unwilling to believe that there are intelligent people living in this part of the world. I've sat across the table with them, and they honestly, they feel that intelligence only belongs to them. It is only a commodity that they can harbor, and the others are dull. The chapter of Afghanistan has proven it the other way around. They have no clue, as you said, to the ground realities. They had no clue to what was happening over the last couple of years. They had no clue that Taliban could actually act so intelligently.
Yeah.
So, but they forgot the fact, that they have generations, which were born and bred in the battlefield. 40 years is not a short period in a nation's history. They've gone through, as I repeatedly say, gone through fire, and these think tankers, sitting in their air-conditioned rooms and all that, and stuck are infatuated with promoting themselves and not giving due consideration, to what others may or may not be able to do. They have just been promoting a single-minded narrative that again and again, I mean, America has lost all the wars, starting from Korea to Vietnam to wherever you go, basically. There's not a war that they won. And yet, they rate America as invincible. So, I think they need to, I keep engaging with them on social media once in a while, and it's interesting, but I keep telling them, I say, just, put your feet on the ground and start looking at a country as it really is, not as what you want it to turn into. Just like, for 20 years, they made an effort to turn Afghanistan into a Western democracy. The ground conditions were not right. They're not the kind of people who would accept Western democracy. Yes, maybe 100 years down the lane, 200 years down the lane, if it evolves, that's okay. But you can't impose things on them. Yeah. So, they're detached from reality. There was, the DC think tankers, they get very angry, when I use the term, that you're totally detached from reality, but actually they are totally detached from reality. They don't have a clue to what they talk about, and at this moment in time, most of them are totally embarrassed, so they're talking more than ever before to cover up for their embarrassment. So, but I'm, it's an interesting period, for you and I basically to go through to see that this can happen. I mean, the very act of a ragtag military, 30,000 people, defeating the sole superpower of the world, and along with 57 other countries, the NATO countries and all that. I mean, it's a remarkable feat.
Yeah.
And then they blame Pakistan as having done it. We must sit and talk about that someday, It's another very interesting feature,
Absolutely, sir. We're almost at the 1 hour limit, and we have to, wrap up the conversation. But there's one question that I ask every time I have a guest in, and I'd like to ask you as well, particularly in the context of the region as well. Where do you think Pakistan in the next 30 years, 2050 is generally the time when I try to see, how we're going to evolve. Where do you think Pakistan would be in 2050? And where do you think the region will be in 2050, 30 years from now?
See, if there is peace in Afghanistan, which hopefully there will be, the connectivity will improve further. We will be exposed to the world in a more formidable way than we've ever been before. We are on the right track. We have China. We have the regional connectivity here. We're trying to forge further, closer connectivity with countries of the region. Russia is on board, more or less. Iran remains a question mark, but I think, since, as I said, we remain engaged with Iran. If all this happens and it falls in place, and this region acts as one closely connected region, working for common objectives and all that, I think I see this region, as the leader in the world by 2050. Definitely. Iran, I mean, of course, China will play a very major role in that, very major role in that. But I see the emergence of these countries, as welfare-oriented countries, in another 20 years or so. That will be a great achievement. I think some good comes out of wars also. And I think if this comes out, I think this will be a direct derivative of the war in Afghanistan, prolonged war in Afghanistan. And I think all countries of the region stand to benefit from it, but they have to work together. That is very important, There should be no conflict in this part of the world. And that reminds me of India. If India can somehow understand that its future too belongs to this region, which it believed till about 5, 6, 7 years ago, till when they opted for shaking hands with the Americans, and they detached themselves from this region. Like Pakistan had committed the plunder back in 1948-49. We plucked ourselves out of the region and shook hands with the Americans, which did not help us. Unfortunately, instead of learning from us, India has committed this plunder. So if India falls back into the region and becomes one of the countries rather than the country trying to dominate the region, I think we have...
there is absolutely no doubt.
We have a great future beckoning our next generation. And I'm very optimistic.
100%, sir. Thank you so much for the optimism, for the insight, and for taking the time out for...
My pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thank you.
And for all of you guys, thank you so much for watching. If you like the episode, please do share it with your friends. For YouTube, if you click on the like button, it will increase our engagement and we'll get more viewership. If you do agree or disagree with anything that Sir Raoof has said, please do let us know in the comment section about what your thoughts are. And isi ke saath saath, this was Muzammil Hasan Zaidi. You were watching Thought Behind Things. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.